Everyone. I am Rabbi Michael Birnholz. I am at Temple Beth Shalom in Vero Beach, Florida. This experience that we are having of studying together came forward from a Tikkun Leil Shavuot that was set up amongst the small congregations over 2 years ago. We're actually getting ready for the third, and it opened up a window for me to say, how do I work with rabbis all over the country using this in absolutely incredible technology of Zoom to be able to bring us together. My congregation is a small congregation. We are in the middle of nowhere between the somewheres. We live in Vero Beach, which is about an hour plus north of Palm Beach. Palm Beach is a big Jewish community. We're over an hour away. We're the only synagogue in our community. And so always looking for ways, for opportunities for our congregation to collaborate with other congregations. And so in this 50 days of the Omer, it was a wonderful opportunity to reach out to colleagues and say, what if we taught about different Jewish rituals? What if we had a debate amongst ourselves about the most important Jewish ritual, and each week different rabbis joined together to teach about each week a different ritual. And that is what you have come to join us for. Last week there was a beautiful lesson with Rabbi Leah Berkowitz and Rabbi Cookie Olshine, which you can view on YouTube. It is on the Temple Beth Shalom of Vero Beach YouTube channel. There is a playlist for this, and as we get later into our session, I'll try to drop a link for that into the chat on this so that you'll be able to see that. And today I am joined by a colleague, Rabbi Rachael Jackson, who I am bringing her in forward to join me here on the Bima, sort of, live from Hendersonville, North Carolina. And there's a beautiful saying that if you find yourself a teacher, you'll make for yourself a friend. And that is what I am discovering with this, that I've reached out through our various rabbi channels. I said, who else wants to teach? And I am connecting with people all across this country that I have never had the opportunity to cross paths with. Some of them I have taught with a lot on Zoom and met them at the CCR conference last month. Rabbi Jackson and I saw who was teaching what sessions, and I reached out to Rabbi Jackson. I said, can I come and join you for this session of Tzitzit? We've never met in person. I've driven through Hendersonville, North Carolina a number of times. Hopefully someday we will cross paths in person, but it has been a phenomenal experience to work with her on this lesson, to get to know her a little bit, and to realize this is the developing of not just being colleagues, but friends together, teaching together, being able to share with our communities together. That's what this is about, being able to transcend time and space and join together in these amazing days as our community, as our people go from Surus, from Egypt, from Mitzrayim, to freedom and standing at Mount Sinai. So we hope over the next hour to be able to fill your minds and fill your hearts with all kinds of incredible knowledge about Tzitzit, about Tallit. That is the topic for today. As I introduce myself, I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Jackson and give her a chance to introduce herself to our community of study that gathers today.
Thank you. And just echoing what Rabbi Birnholz was saying, this has been such a wonderful experiment, frankly, in terms of we weren't sure how this would go. We've done the Shavuot piece. We've never done it extended in this way. And I know for our congregation, it's really been enlightening to be able to listen to others and be a part of a learning community, especially for those of us that are in small places such as Agudas. We're about 45 minutes away from Nashville, which you might have heard of, but if you haven't, we're on the mountain side of North Carolina, not the beach side. And I've been here about 7 years, and I just love our congregation, love our place. And when I was looking at all of these fantastic life cycle, ritual, all those different pieces that we're going to be going over these next 7 weeks, I was really drawn to Tzitzit. And as Rabbi Birnholz and I were talking about, we're like, well, how many Tallitot do you have? Well, how many Tallitot do you have? And it's one of those questions like, well, have a memory associated with each one of them. And so there was something really very powerful about this. So one of the things that we were talking about how we can engage those of you that are here with us virtually, we're going to be putting up some questions that we're encouraging you to ask or to answer in the chat. And then we'll sort of be looking through them and sharing the responses, and that way they'll also be there in chat for others that want to be reading them as we're going through our pieces today. And we're just going to go back and forth. We looked at Tzitzit and said, well, what are the really important things to know about Tzitzit? And one of the challenges, similar to the rabbis last week, that we found was, well, there's just so much. So there's way more than we could possibly teach today. And so if you have follow-up questions, please reach out to either one of us, to your rabbis. We're happy to give you sort of the 102 version at some other points. I'm going to actually turn it back to Rabbi Birnholz and let us proceed with our first set of questions and our slides. I love that you just said, let us know where you're from and tell us, who you are and where you're from.
And so, if you're seeing some of that in chat, somebody, first of all, thank you to Brandon, I believe, who dropped into the chat the link for last week's lesson. And then I just put in a link in Google Drive that will bring up a PDF of this week's lesson for the slides. It's a document that will have the information that's on the slides, so that after the session, if you want to go back to see what Rabbi Jackson and I share, then you'll be able to see that. Also, so chat is a wonderful way to ask questions. Thank you. Thank you, Vivian and Len, for reminding me that I didn't hit unmute on my microphone. So, as I was saying, thank you to Brandon for putting in the link for last week's lesson. And also, I put into the chat, I put in a link for a Google Doc that's a Google document that's a PDF of what Rabbi Jackson and I are going to be sharing with you today. We're going to be sharing slides, but if you want to see it as a PDF, it is there for you to be able to look at and refer to after. Chat is a wonderful way that if you have a question or a response to the reflections that we're going to ask, that you can share those with us. That's also a way, if you have a question, as I said, to type it in the chat, we see it, and then we can weave it into what we are teaching. A more difficult way is to wave your hand with your video, because there is not necessarily a guarantee that we will see it, but it sometimes will catch our attention if you're not comfortable with the chat. There's also a lovely raise hand function, and that will actually pop up in our participants list and show us that somebody has a question. So chat and the raise hand function are the two best ways to get our attention. The old school raise your hand to be called on way is a little more complicated, but we will do the best we can. Some of you are putting in where you're from and who you are. That is very appreciated. It gives us a sense of this wonderful community that we have. And so it is time to get started, as we are talking about Tzitzit and we are talking about Tallit. And so, with much ado, Rabbi Jackson, share the screen.
Happily. All right, so we're going to start here. There we go. Can everyone see our blessing here today?
And so
All right, I don't hear anyone saying no.
And so we start with a blessing for study as a reminder that this isn't just sitting, this is not a class just to learn. This is soaking in words of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. And as we say Amen, and I say click. Tzitzit. And so we are talking about Tzitzit. I'm assuming you can see this. This is a tzitzit that is tied. We'll talk about the form of them. You also, for the most part, we find them on a Tallit. So this is an individual, and here are the four corners. It comes from the section of Numbers which is part of the reading of Shema. So if you, in the Reform world, you might know the V'ahavta. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your might. They're in gates of prayer and in Mishkan Tefillah. In most places, when you look at that page, you're seeing two paragraphs. Sometimes it's not easy to delineate them. The second paragraph goes, L'ma'an tizkaru, that you shall remember them. So you've got, you shall love the Lord your God, and then you shall be reminded, L'ma'an tizkaru v'asitem otam, so you will be remembered so that you can do them. What got lost in the Union Prayer Book and in Gates of Prayer, and is starting to creep back into Mishkan Tefillah, is a section before L'ma'an tizkaru. That's a quote from the book of Numbers. And you're seeing it here in English before you. Adonai spoke to Moses as follows: speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make fringes, tzitzit, on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. You will look at it and recall all of the commandments of Adonai and observe them, so you do not follow your heart and your eyes in your lustful urge. Thus you shall be reminded to observe all my commandments, to be holy to your God. I, Adonai, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, Adonai, am your God. So I'm hoping that you shall be reminded to observe all your commandments, all my commandments, is familiar from our worship service. I'm guessing that many of you have not seen that paragraph before it, that they are from the same section of Numbers. And if you were in a Orthodox or conservative Siddur, you'd actually see this whole paragraph. This is the beginning of Tzitzit. That is the beginning of something we're also going to call Techelet. This is a Tallit that I made. And actually, one of the folks that is here, her name is Ellen Deshat, is a member of my congregation. And she taught me to knit before she departed for the Atlanta area. And so you can see on my Tallit, you see, I hope, blue and white. So these are the tzitzit that I tied. That blue is the Techelet. So click. So that's the text. That's the commandment to, you're supposed to put fringes on your garment. Then you get to ask these questions. Wait, what is this garment and what are the fringes? So the first is that you get this command, so we get the word tzitzit. And there's always that question of, what is a tzit? And so here, this is a section from Numbers. And so this is when you have the rebellion of Korath, and you have Aaron and Moses, and it's like the sharks and the jets, that you've got a standoff between the two. And Aaron and Moses, and they put a staff out as a way of saying, everybody put your staff out, and the one who special stuff happens to your staff, then you're going to be the one that God chooses. So here we have Moses deposits the staff before Adonai. Vayihi mimocharat yavo Moshe el ohel ha'edut vehine parach ma'ateh Aharon levi yatzeh parech v'yatzeh tzit. I hope you hear tzit and tzitzit. The next day Moses entered the pact. There on the staff of Aaron of the house of Levi had sprouted. It bore sprouts. Okay? And so in Numbers, it says fringes. Here's another use of that same root, and it's sprout. And you have to realize I am a gardener. Not a great gardener, but a well-practiced gardener. I, at some point, will practice this, and it will succeed. I was named in the Wall Street Journal as the Job of biblical gardening. And so here you have a tzit. So how is it a sprout? One of two ways. Either that here you have the stalk, and the tzit, the fringes that hang down, are the roots. And here, the tallit that it's attached to, the garment that it's attached to, is the rest of the plant. Or the garment is the root, and here you have the plant growing up. And so this is one of those pieces of imagery to create this tzitzit. What are these fringes? How did we turn them into knots that we do. That's one kind of piece of this possibility. How do you take a word, tzitzit, that might have been known in the ancient world, and how does it become what we use today? And so click. And so here is a little bit of that numerology. So first of all, you have the Tallit, which is the garment, and then we have the tzitzit, which are the fringes, the knots, the sprouts. Here is one piece of looking at this. We're going to look at about 3 or 4 slides. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, but I want you just to get a sense of, this is a good Jewish artifact. An artifact is a concrete object, and we use them to help us tell our story and to do rituals. It's a good Jewish artifact because the more explanations there are, the better Jewish artifact it is. And there are so many ways of talking about tzitzit and describing it. I always find it really astounding. So one of the things that you will see here is that there's spelling, that you have the word tzitzit equals 500 equals 600, and that the knots on the tzitzit, the 8 strings that you have and the 5 knots, 5 plus 8 is 13. And what happens if you add 600 to 13? You get 613 mitzvot. You will also see that you have the shamash, which is the techelet, the blue. That's the one you do the winding with. And so you can see on this that there are 2 knots and then 7 coils, 2 knots and 8 coils, 2 knots and 11 coils, and 2 knots and 13 coils, and then 2 more knots. So you have 4 sets of coils, and you have 5 knots. By the way, you will see other times of tzitzit that do all kinds of different things. This is kind of a standard Ashkenazic way of tying tzitzit. Click. So some of you are visual learners, and some of you need to see the words. Here are the words of what I was just explaining. Tzitzit fringes on both garments are tied in a unique way. Tzitzit tying customs vary from community to community. However, the standard is that there are 4 corners, there are 8 strings, and 5 knots. Especially meaningful in gematria and numerical world, the word tzitzit, making sure you have 2 yuds, is 600, plus 8 strings and 5 knots is 613. Click. You also get other kinds of interpretations. Here you see the 613. Click to the next slide. So this is the second part of this explanation. In another version, 8 threads correspond to the 8 days that elapsed from the Israelites leaving Egypt until they sang the song of deliverance. So the 8 days remind us of, if you're looking at your tzitzit, if you're holding tzitzit, we're going to have a lot of sensory questions and thoughts for you to think about. You're going to remember those 8 days of going from Egypt to crossing the Sea of Reeds. When they were still in that liminal space, they were not sure they were going to get out. They knew the Egyptians were following them. They needed God's protection, but they made it to the side of the sea. Then it has 5 knots, and the knots remind us of the pieces of Torah, and the 5 books of Torah, and then finally, all of the windings, 7 plus 8 plus 11 plus 13 equals 39, and the word Shema, wouldn't you know, the numeric value in the Hebrew of Adonai Echad, if you add up all of those, it equals 39. So here we're saying Shema, remembering 8 days from Egypt to the Sea of Reeds, remembering 5 books of Torah. Each one has a different thread of story that we look at. I remember seeing listening to an episode of Home Cooking Podcast talking about latkes, and it said the Jewish way to approach the world is you do something and then you figure out what it means. I hope you're seeing that well illustrated. Next slide. Okay, so here's a further one. The top, you'll see, is that explanation I just gave of the 39 equaling Adonai Echad, but look at the bottom where it says others, especially Sephardic Jews, use 10, 5, 6, 5, which corresponds to Yud He Vav He, which is the name Tetragrammaton, the name of Adonai that we do not pronounce. So the Ashkenazi tie one way. Those are the Jews from the Christian world starting in Germany, which is Ashkenaz, and moving into Eastern Europe. Sephardim were, Sepharad is Spain, and so that was the Mediterranean basin. We used two different ways of tying tzitzit, of number of knots and loops and all of that, and yet in that same breath, you're seeing both of them are tying into when we see tzitzit, when we hold tzitzit, when we wear tzitzit, we're connecting with the divine and that unity of the divine. Next slide. And the last piece is, we don't just have the tzitzit, we wear them. And so this is part of one form of a meditation that you say when you're putting on tzitzit, bless the eternal, O my soul. Adonai, my God, how great you are. You were robed in glory and majesty. This is words from the Psalms. You wrap yourself in light as in a garment. You spread forth the heavens like a curtain. And so the idea is that just as God is opening creation in the morning like a curtain, we open our Tallit, that is a reminder of God's presence, and you say a blessing, thanking God for reminding us to wrap ourselves in fringed garments. One last quick note before I turn it over to Rabbi Jackson. There are two different kinds of Tallit. There's a Tallit Gadol. This is a Tallit, both of these are Tallit Gadol, and there's a Tallit Katan. Tallit Katan is meant to be worn all the time. So if you are in a more traditional community, you might see somebody walking around all the time with 4 tzitzit hanging out. That's actually a garment worn under the clothes with the 4 tzitzit. These Tallit Gadol are worn in moments of ritual, and so you wear them and put them on when you come into the sanctuary. And so, Rabbi Jackson, I think I'm turning it over to you for our next section.
Yep. All right, thank you. So let me go ahead and put a couple of these questions in our chat. What is meaningful about wearing a tallit? Do you have a favorite one? And when do you personally wear a tallit? And I ask that question because some of the things that I'm going to be going through are more of a traditional or halachic center. That's our that's our starting point, but that doesn't mean that we necessarily follow it. So for example, I usually wear one during any prayer service, whether that's morning, noon, or night. And it's where it's meaningful for me. And as I was starting, again, I'll be answering this question. I don't have a favorite tallit. I have 5 favorite tallits. And Rabbi Birnholz was showing one of his. So I'm actually going to stop this share so it's a little bit bigger. This, here's the atzara and the pretty design. And then the sort of where the actual tzitzit are way down here. So my tzitzit are without techelet, without blue in them. So think about those. Let us know where you're sort of feeling. I see that there's some going ahead to answering that. So I'm going to share our screen again. There's another place that we can see tzitzit coming up. And this comes from Hava Rabbah prayer, which in Mishkan Tefillah is on 230. It says, gather us in peace from the 4 corners of the earth, and lead us upright to your land. For you, O God, work wonders. You chose us, truly you drew us near to your great name, that we might acknowledge you, declaring you one in love. Praise be you, Adonai, who chooses your people Israel in love. I just wanted to highlight, right, those words right there. 4 corners of the earth. That is not a factual statement. The earth is not flat. We are not talking about things actually hanging down, right? I saw sort of a meme about that. I was saying if the world were flat, cats would have pushed everything off of it by now. So this is not a statement of what the globe actually looked like, but rather a ingathering. Right? An ability to bring us all together. And we think about it, many of us are in rooms with 4 corners, and we say, in every sphere, or northeast, southwest, right? That's 4 different cardinal directions. So that's really what it's talking about here. And at that point, that's where we have our, that's where we have the 4 talitot. I'm going to skip this since Rabbi Birnholz already told us about it, but this is yet another one of those places. In this particular point, though, I'm looking at this from a mitzvah, right? That these are the fringes that we are saying, oh, know them, instruct them to actually do this. That we can say, okay, now I know why I should be doing this. It wasn't just somebody somewhere on a corner with a megaphone telling me this is what I should be doing. This is coming from our Torah. This is coming from our place of halakhic authority that we have based our tradition on for thousands of years. In a good way, we do not just leave all of our understanding the Torah. We rather say, okay, need a little bit more about this, or a lot of bit more about this. And that's where we get into Talmud. Right, so we know that Torah itself is about 300 pages long. Talmud is something like 42 books long. I mean, it's a lot more. And so they have a lot to say about this. One part, first comes Mishnah. This is Mishnah Berachot 1-2, asking the question, when does one recite the Shema in the morning? And of course, they then answer their own question. When a person can distinguish sky blue and white, right? And the sky blue is really the Tallit that Rabbi Birnholz was talking about earlier. Of course, in good Mishnaic and Talmudic fashion, they say, or I have a different opinion. One recites the Shema in the morning when you can distinguish between sky blue and leek green. Let me unpack that for just 1 second. If you're thinking about morning and you have no light, right? Like I've got my fluorescent light bulbs in my office. I see a lot of you are also learning by electricity. Imagine living in a place, living in a world where you only have the sun and you only know that the sunshine is that difference between night and sleeping, and now I should be awake and doing something. How much more light do you need from blue and white to sky blue and leek green, right? That difference of light could be, depending where you live, 45 more minutes, right? Because I can tell the difference between blue and white pretty easily, right? That's a light dark contrast. Something like a Khalid and this leek green, those two are almost the same color. And so I read this and I go, Rabbi Eliezer liked to sleep in. That's what I'm reading in this one, right? He is acknowledging that some of us do not want to wake up in the pre-dawn period, but would rather wake up a little bit later. And so that's one of the things that I read in here. Let's see. There's another piece that I sort of wanted to bring also from Talmud. This is Menachot, about why. We've talked about what it is. We've talked about, oh, here it is in the Torah that we're supposed to do them, and then we know when we're supposed to do them. And we can understand, let me go back to that slide for a second. We can understand that when the rabbis are using this term that you can distinguish between techelet and white, they're letting you know that you're wearing your tallit in the morning so that you can see the difference, right? That's the underlying assumption here too, that by saying techelet, they want you to be putting your tallit on in the mornings. This is the clock and the function of why we're supposed to do it, in terms of because halakha said so and when we're supposed to do it. But then we really ask the question, why? If I'm going to do something like this, why? And not like that 4-year-old asking the question, well, why this and why this and why this? But if I'm going to do a ritual, I'd like to understand that there's probably more meaning to that ritual than just doing it. And so Menachot tells us, seeing leads remembering. Now, what does that mean, seeing? Well, right, again, I'm just bringing it way up so you all can actually see it. My Khalid, exactly, thank you, Rabbi Birnholz, right? that this Tallit Gadol, which is worn on the outside during a prayer time, I literally can literally see them. And as we went through, are 600. These knots remind me that there's 613 mitzvot which structure my life. And I see them and I remember, oh, this is how I'm supposed to act. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is how I can do it. Now that I've remembered that, well, let me actually do it. Let me actually go and do these mitzvot that I'm supposed to do. And I put it in quotes like that because that was perhaps a understanding of our tradition at one point, or for some folks. That is not necessarily how I understand our halacha. And so seeing leads to doing, which when we look at Judaism, we're a doing religion. We're doing people. We're not just a have this ritual for the sake of the ritual, but have this ritual and these objects to encourage you to do something with them. I'll just add one sort of extra tiny piece here. Like I said, I've been doing a little of the halacha pieces. We recognize that what was in Talmudic times is not necessarily where we are in the 21st century understanding of variety of ways of connecting to rituals. And I just want to be very blatant about that permission of saying, you know, what works for you sounds probably good, right? So I don't want to be like, oh, you're not supposed to wear it on Friday nights because it's nighttime and you don't wear a tallit at night unless it's Yom Kippur, or you can only wear it when you're in a minyan, or et cetera, et cetera. Any questions on this part? I'm going to go ahead and stop our share, see what we can have for questions. All right, I actually see Ellen waving her hand. Ellen, go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, sorry, I waved my hand reflexively.
No, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, I always have a question about when I'm always very not sure when to wear it. Halachically, as you point out, when I might be prompted or inspired to wear it just at any other time.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, beautiful question. So from a halachic standpoint, if we're talking Tallit Gadol, right, a Tallit Gadol, as Rabbi Birnholz explained, is the one that's worn on the outside. In some traditional communities, you've got the one that you wear as just part of next to your skin. You wear it all the time. For the Tallit Gadol, the idea from a traditional standpoint is to wear it when you do prayers and rituals in a minyan and at prescribed time. So that would be in communities that have a prayer service in the mornings and in the afternoons. That would be Shabbat. That would be every holiday in the mornings and the afternoons. It would then not be worn in the evenings, because if we looked back at that quote from Mishnah that says when you can see it, right, when you can see blue versus white, that's letting us know, well, you can't actually see it at nighttime. So then the tradition is to not wear a tallit at nighttime. The permissive understanding that we have toward halacha in liberal and reform Judaism is to say, if your keva, if your intention is there, you understand, great. Sounds good, wear it. Before I became a rabbi, I wore my tallit every Friday night. It was like I put it on anytime I prayed, whether or not I was with a minyan, whether I was by myself, if I was in my house or the sanctuary or out in the woods, like I had it. That was meaningful. So I just want to break down those barriers and say, if it's meaningful for you, great.
So,
Rabbi Birnholz.
We're getting a couple of questions in the chat. I'll also add that you'll see here that I'm holding up a tzitzit, or tzitzit, that I've actually made out of lanyard string. All those years that I made lanyards at Jewish summer camps, no one ever said, why don't you use it to make tzitzit? Because I don't wear a tallit katan. I don't wear a tzitzit garment with tzitzit all the time. But and you'll see some of this discussion in just a minute with my next section, that I do. I wanted to have tzitzit as a visual reminder. That's what Rabbi Jackson is sharing with us. It's supposed to be something that is tactile, that you can touch it, you can see it. I think I said that tzitzit is a clock, right? Because it tells us when it's morning. It is a sticky note or a reminder, a rubber band on your wrist, because it's supposed to catch your attention. So we've put these on, made them on keychains so you can put them with your car keys so they're in your pocket. Every time you go to open a door, get in your car, you're seeing the tzitzit. People put it on their backpack. We've had kids that can't put them on a backpack. So again, it's how do you, if this is the artifact, where do you put it that you see it, that you have this experience? There's also a couple of questions. One, Leonard and Vivian Birkin were asking about Tallit, the blue, because they have not encountered a lot of Tallitot that have Tallit. Rabbi Jackson is going to devote an entire section about that quite interesting piece. The other question is, why on the Mincha of Tisha B'Av, do you wear Tallit? And this kind of goes with what Rabbi Jackson is saying. There are certain times that our tradition says, wear Tallit Gadol. So you wear it in the morning, and you wear it, if you are leading worship, you might wear it in the evening. Kol Nidre, Erev Yom Kippur, people wear Tallit, and at different times in Tisha B'Av. One of the reasons for Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, wearing them at times when you normally would not, is just that. It's nighttime, and I'm putting on a Tallit. This doesn't feel normal. It doesn't feel right. It's supposed to catch your attention and say, this is something I do only certain times. I'm supposed to feel the kavod, the weight of that moment, as I quite literally have extra weight on my shoulders in that moment. And so the wearing a tallit in certain worship moments and not in others becomes a way of noting that flow of time. And again, another way of that being a very powerful symbol. Marie is asking, what's the difference in the two, how are made? The tzitzit, the knots, are done the same way, whether it's a tallit katan or a tallit gadol. Whether it's an outer tallit that you wear or an under tallit that you wear, the tzitzit are done in exactly the same way. There are differences between how some different communities, how they actually tie their tzitzit. I think I answered those questions. Any other questions? And please, when we're going to add a few more questions for you, please feel free to respond in the chat. It's great to see some of those different responses. So Ellen is asking, but if you want to say Kaddish, isn't that weighty enough to put it on at night? So you're saying that when you say Kaddish, that feels like a powerful moment, let me put on a tallit? And the answer to that is, there's an interesting one. When do you actually say Kaddish? Not when you respond, because in Reform Judaism, we've gotten into this habit that everybody says Kaddish all the time. But there's also a whole practice that you only say Kaddish when someone you love has died in the year of Kaddish or when it's yahrzeit. And so you wouldn't be saying it Kaddish all the time, and therefore you wouldn't, with that question, you might not put on Tallit. So there's a bunch of different questions and thoughts there of when do you wear it and and that actually brings us to our next section that I'm going to explain. What is the experience that Tzitzit create for you? Rabbi Jackson, share that screen. I've been watching way too many cooking shows. Okay, Tzitzit in our day. Okay, and can we be comfortable wearing and finding meaning in Tzitzit? This is a piece that I found a number of years ago from Rabbi Rachael Barenblatt. You might see her in the Velveteen Rabbi. An amazing, amazing blog, a great teacher. And so tying tzitzit has become one of my favorite mitzvot. It's funny to remember that a mere 4 years ago, the practice was new to me. She didn't wear tzitzit 4 years ago. I learned how to tie tzitzit in order to try out the mitzvah of wearing tallit katan. So she didn't want to wear tallit katan, so she wanted to tie tzitzit as part of her experience of what does it mean for me to wear tallit katan. Click. I tried out the mitzvah myself in order to feel good about asking my students to do so. In those days, I taught the 5th or 7th graders at my shul. I wanted my students to learn how to tie tzitzit, to have the experience of wearing them. They weren't old enough yet to take on the mitzvah of Tallit Gadol, the big Tallit that adults pray in. So here we have a rabbi, and I don't know if Rabbi Birnholz at the time that she wrote this had been ordained or not, but saying, I didn't grow up with Tallit. I didn't wear Tallit growing up. I wanted that experience, and so I learned to tie them and wear them before I then taught my students. Because some of this stuff happens not because you see it, oh, I want to wear Tallit. It's you start wearing it, you experience, and then you see how it feels. Remember what I said earlier? In Judaism, we do stuff, and then we figure out what it means. Sometimes you have to do stuff, even if you don't have a meaning, because in doing it, you find that meaning for yourself, or you find out what works or doesn't work, or you say, this is really uncomfortable. I don't know that I'll do it all the time, but I do need to do it some of the time because I'm not always supposed to be comfortable in worship. There's a loaded statement. So, my question is, why? How do we let me back up one second. So why is there a rabbi who didn't wear Tallit? And click one more. I don't remember if I had the slide. Here. Through the 19th and early 20th centuries, Reform Judaism moved away from tzitzit and Tallit. There was in Reform Judaism, and it's often called classical Reform Judaism, there was an idea that enlightened, rational Jews do not need physical reminders to live out our values. That if we're rational and we're reasonable, we don't need physical reminders to tell us to be good people. We should just know that because that's reasonable and we're intelligent. And there was also so that was part of it. It was, aren't we smart enough? Why do we need to walk around with fringes to catch our eyes and remind us to do things? We should be above and beyond that kind of thing. There was also a lot of push and pull coming from, in that idea of Reform Judaism and American Judaism, that I don't want to look different from everybody else. That there was a push and pull of assimilation that said, I don't want to walk around with tzitzit hanging out of my pants. When I have visitors come to the synagogue and they're seeing me, I don't want them to see I have a prayer shawl with knots on it. That we want to fit in with the Protestants and the Catholics in those days and age, or people of other religions. They're not wearing funny clothes. I don't want to wear funny clothes either. And so there was a real push and pull, both we should be beyond it and we want to fit in. And Reform Judaism really pushed hard against wearing Tallit, of using tzitzit. However, and this goes back into the 1970s and 80s and beyond, and you'll see there's a beautiful text called the Jewish Catalog and the URJ camps and all sorts of different threads that came back in that realized that spirituality and memory are tied into moving from thought to action. I can give you 2 examples. Why do we light a yahrzeit candle? You could just stop and remember your loved one, because there's something powerful that happens. And we actually talked about that last week. When you strike a match and light a candle, that you have that physical action and that visual reminder and all of your senses brought in, that this is a powerful act of memory. Or when you go to a cemetery, you take a stone with you and you put it on the headstone, because you're doing physical action. You're feeling the weight, quite literally, feeling the weight of memory, and then you're also doing an action in connection to somebody's memory. And what do we say? That you want to turn memory into a blessing. I'm taking thought, I'm taking feelings, and turning it into action. And that leads me to a set of questions for you. When you're in worship, what do you need more? Or do you need a fidget toy? And my congregation knows I have fidget toys all around. I talk with my hands. If you haven't noticed that already, I think with something better in my hand. Tzitzit, and you'll see this in a second, are a great fidget toy. I have story after story. I'll show one to you in a minute. of people that remember sitting in services and nodding and unnodding, of holding the tzitzit of their adult next to them, and that was part of their memory? Do you need it as a moral compass? Do you need that visual reminder to say, wait, let me stop, let me think, what am I trying to do here? Do you need a lovey? Do you need something? We were having a discussion about, do you have a warm tallit or a cold tallit? Do you need something soft? Do you need something that was made by a loved one? Do you need to have something that has color, something that you wrap yourself and feel like you're connected with through that experience of love with something greater than yourself, whether it is generations? Do you just need that physical soft, or is your sanctuary so darn cold that you need something to keep you warm? So I ask those kinds of questions. I'm curious, for how many of you is it a good fidget toy or a moral compass? It's something to see. How many of you might need a lovey? Is it more that you might need it for worship, or that you like the idea of having it for everyday life? Don't worry, I just asked like 6 questions. So if you only want to chime in with one, fidget toy, moral compass, or lovey, I'd love to see some of those answers. If we could click. And so thinking about your senses, what are your strongest senses of spirituality, of sight, of sound, of touch, of smell, of taste? And when you think of tzitzit, is there a sense that you think of? We're going to keep going because I'm watching the time, and I wanted to get to the Tallit. Here's a beautiful poem by Amichai, and if you go to that Google Doc, you will see it. You can hear some of those sensory words. Taking it out of the soft velvet bag, opening the folded shawl, spreading it out, kissing the length of the neckband, swooping it in a great swoop overhead like a sky, a wedding canopy, a parachute, winding it around your head and hide and seek as he holds body, and then we can click. And then why is it striped and not checkered? Because squares are finite and hopeless, stripes go into infinity. Airport runways, where angels take off and land, very visual there. Whoever puts in a tallis will never forget. When he comes out of a swimming pool or the sea, wrapping himself in a large towel, spreading over his head again. All of those very sensory experiences. So I'm curious, for you, of your spirituality, which of those senses get speak to, and which does tzitzit connect to? And we can keep going. Here is the memory. When I close my eyes, this is from Lisa Gerber, to picture my grandfather, he's standing beside a long olive green bookcase, swaying and shuffling, swaying and back and forth, his slight frame enfolded in his tallit, the filling protruding from his forehead and wrapped in his arm, deeply engaged in conversation with God. At those moments, it always seemed that he was transported to a different place and time. Perhaps it was a magic cape, I thought, one with strings attached. As a little girl, I yearned to wear a tallit. No surprise that some of my fondest childhood memories are sitting with my grandfather in shul on Shabbat, sharing his tallit. Next slide. Throughout services, I would play with the tzitzit, enjoying the feel of the fringes as they slipped between my fingers, methodically adding new knots and removing them again before the conclusion of the service, each knot a blessing for myself and my family. My grandfather was a humble man, dedicated to his store, his family, and his God. He embodied the love of education and humanity. I knew that those cornerstones of existence were bound up with those carefully constructed knots. Memory and artifact, memory into doing, as Rabbi Jackson talked about. We can click. And then here again, that shall be your fringe, to look at and recall the commandments of Adonai, to observe them, so you will not follow your heart and do your eyes and your lustful urge. It's a visual reminder. A moral compass. Can you see them and remember as you are making choices, as you're going through your day, as you move out to touch things with your hand, as you give something the attention of your eyes? Does your tallit, the tzitzit, capture your attention and say, wait, what is the choice I'm making? A spiritual speed bump to slow you down for just a moment, to give intention to what you do. And I think that should bring us to our section on Tallit.
That's right. And so I'm actually going to ask you, Rabbi Birnholz, to hold up your tallit with the Khalid on it.
So,
So it's very clear.
So I have
Excellent. So it's very clear which one has the blue and which one doesn't. Excellent. Thank you.
none with deep green. None with
That's right. So asking other folks, do you have any Tallit with blue tzitzit? Why or why not? And if you were to personalize your tzitzit, again, tzitzit, not just the Tallit, but the specific tzitzit with color, would you do it any particular color? How would you do that? Right, some things to be thinking about here. So why do we keep focusing on this techelet? Where is this coming from? And so let's go back to Talmud. It's talking about this particular color, this particular kind of color. This also comes from Menachot. It's taught in a Braita that Rabbi Meir would say, what is different about techelet from all other colors, such as that it was chosen for the mitzvah of ritual fringes? It is because techelet is similar in its color to the sea, and the sea is similar to the sky, and the sky is similar to the throne of glory, as it is said. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under God's feet like paved work of sapphire stone, and the like of the very heaven for clearness, indicating that the sky is like sapphire brickwork, as it is written, likeness of a throne as the appearance of a sapphire stone. That might help understand in this particular translation of Menachot what blue techelet is thinking of. But imagine that power, right? That there's this purpose of having this blue there, such that it is the sky, it is the sea. And in Judaism, we really love saying this and that indicate everything in between. It's not just the sea and the sky, it's all encompassing. It's no matter where you look, you are surrounded by this glory, by this incredible holiness, by this incredible color that reminds you of the world itself. And that is the color on our fringes, right? How powerful of a color that would be. So then that begs the question, where do we get it? Right? We have to know, okay, so that's the color and why it's important, but how do I get it? And so our sages taught the chilazon, which is the source of the sky blue dye used in ritual fringes, has the following characteristics. Its body resembles the sea. Its form resembles that of a fish. It emerges once in 70 years. And with its blood, one dyes wool. Sky blue for ritual fringes is scarce, therefore expensive. Well, it still didn't tell me what it was. It just told me that was hard to find. And when I did find it, it'd be expensive. So it's this idea, is it a snail, an oyster? Is it a purple fish? What is it? And we're not really sure. It has been lost for centuries. The actual mollusk is just unknown. As we can see in Bamidbar Rabbi. This is a midrash that was done a little bit after portions of the Talmud. And it brings in this quote, and make for yourself tzitzit. The commandment is to bring white and techelet and make them when there's techelet. And now we do not have anything but white, since the techelet has been lost. So we know that it hasn't just been lost in modernity. We're looking at hundreds and hundreds of years, right? This is, plus or minus 1,500, 1,300 years ago, right? This has been a long time since we've actually known where this blue is, which is where this concept is saying, well, why the majority of Tallitot produced since that time have only had white fringes, because we don't know where it comes from. It does not mean that we haven't tried. That does not mean we have yet actually find the perfect blue, find the techelet, find that mollusk that lets us experience this. And our last one here, we have seen that it has said sapphire and sky and ocean. And I don't know about you, but those are all very different colors depending on the day, depending on the ocean, depending which blue is it? Yes. good rabbinic tradition, answer is yes. Is it more of a purple? Sure. Is it more of a greenish blue? Sure. Is it dark and navy and sort of ominous? Why not? Right? That because we don't have this exact color, where is it? Now, of course, there have been, I'm going to stop our share here so I can see all of your faces. There, of course, has been this need to find it. And so there's archaeological digs and archaeological evidence saying, I found it, and it's this purple thing. And here's the particular dye, and here's the mollusk that it came from, and it was put in air, and it was exposed to acids, and if that's your goal, great. But if that's not your goal, and you're trying to figure out, where does this fit with my heart? How do I connect to the tradition? And the particular color and the particular animal from which it came may not really be that important, which is why in the last little bit of Judaism, we have now seen a resurgence of Tallit coming back, of our Tzitzit, carrying these beautiful colors, carrying it and saying, this is meaningful to me, to really differentiate this from that. And so I hope that you can sort of expand your mind, as mine has also been expanded, to understand Tzitzit and the Tallit in other ways. And I see in one of the questions, one of the comments is that, is this why the Israeli flag is blue? And yes, this is right. That idea of a traditional Tallit being blue stripes was modeled directly after the Tallit for the Israeli flag. And I'll turn it back over to Rabbi Birnholz.
Rabbi Jackson, what I would actually add is that there's a both and. Part of the reason why a lot of Talitot only have white tzitzit is because the knowledge of where the Tallit came from disappeared. There's also kind of what we have, when you see the letters Yud He Vav He, you don't pronounce the letters. We might have ways of pronouncing them, but we don't even try. We say Adonai. We don't say the name of God. We could do sacrifices, but we don't try because there's not a temple in Jerusalem. There are certain things that we say, this happened in the past, we're going to remember them, we're going to honor them, we're going to acknowledge them, but as part of our realization of what has happened to our people, what has been lost, what has disappeared, what was taken from us, we are not going to fully restore everything all the time because we want to acknowledge some of that loss and brokenness. And so there are a lot of people that will only have tzitzit that are white, and will tell you should only have tzitzit that are white. To honor and remember is that was something that we don't have anymore, and we're going to let it go, even though we remember it. And then, as Rabbi Jackson said, there are others, and notice I'm holding up both, because there are some times where I have a tallit that I wear that has white, and there are other times where I'm tying where I want that contrast, that connection of heaven and earth, that sense of time, of that, in addition to the moral pieces of memory. So any other questions, because we're coming up right at 1 o'clock, and we wanted to honor your time. Any other questions about Tallit and Tzitzit? The one thing I will say, I wore a Tallit for the first time when I became bar mitzvah. I didn't really touch a Tallit. It wasn't the practice in my congregation until I was in college, and then very much into rabbinical school. My sense of artifact and spirituality has certainly changed a lot since then. If you do not wear Tallit, and you're thinking about doing it, have the chutzpah to try, see what it feels like. That's part of this. This is why I wanted to teach tzitzit. It's why I teach the tzitzit tying to our young people. It is such a powerful symbol with all of the sensory pieces, with all of these threads of story that Rabbi Jackson and I offer. It is such a powerful ritual object. It is so personal, as you're seeing from some of the comments, that we're hoping that more people will wrestle with it, will take it to heart, will weigh it, to see if this is something that is an artifact that helps you connect your spirituality and bring your story into the world. My bar mitzvah tallit that I mentioned, as after a few years here of being at Beth Shalom, I noticed that after many years, the tzitzit were actually starting to deteriorate. So I took off the original tzitzit from my Tallit from Bar Mitzvah, and as my oldest child was coming up for Bat Mitzvah, I learned how to tie tzitzit, and then I got my children together, and each of my 3 children, each one did one of the tzitzit, and then I tied the 4th to make sure I could do it, and then each of my children. So when I put on that Tallit, not only do I remember my parents getting that for me in Israel and bringing it home, and being 13 and having no sense of where it came from, but I remember wearing it. But I also now have this incredible memory of my children as they became Jewish adults, weaving their story and their love and light into that Tallit. And there are lots of beautiful practices to be able to do it. So Ellen Tashad is asking, if you never became Bat Mitzvah or B'nai Mitzvah, could you still wear one? And the answer is yes, because as you wear one, you are taking on the obligations of mitzvah and kind of becoming Bat Mitzvah. Are there any other questions? Before we lose too many folks, as we come up to 1 o'clock, I do want to, so next week at 1 o'clock, 1 o'clock Central Time, noon Eastern, on Zoom, on the same very link, you will be treated to a lesson on mikvah, and that will be taught by Rabbi Simon Schicker and Rabbi Cantor Reina Sorority. They will be sharing with you mikvah, and so we hope that you will see this and share it with your friends. You are welcome to share that YouTube channel link that then would provide people with the, and let me see if I can, so I'm putting back into the chat, if anybody wants the PDF on the Google Doc, it is there with all of the different stories and pieces. We hope you will bring your friends and tell other folks in your congregation. As I mentioned, keep your eye, it's restricted, Rabbi, so I will have to fix that to try to do that. Here's the other easiest thing to do. If you email me at rabbi@cbsvero.org and ask me, or I will happily share that document with you, because I can't talk and do Google Doc at the same time. I could try, it probably wouldn't go very well. But there is going to be a Tikkun Leil Shavuot, so the night of Shavuot. There will be lots of study sessions with different rabbis from across the country. Keep your eyes open, or go to Sinai Reno, Temple Sinai in Reno, Nevada. That is the congregation that is doing the registration. Change to anyone with link.
Yeah, and I just want to also say thank you to everyone for being here. I hope this has been helpful to you, and we are certainly here as if you have clergy in your home area, to answer any of these follow-ups. And adding what Rabbi Birnholz has said, try it, right? That this is a beautiful ritual, and there's really only things to gain, nothing really to lose by trying it. So thank you all for your attention and your curiosities today.
And that Google link did work now. So feel free to go and to look at that PDF. And a huge thank you to Rabbi Jackson. What a wonderful way to start friendships with getting a chance to teach together. And when you're ready to come to the beach, Vero's here, and I'll wave as I come up into the mountains. It is incredible to be able to make these connections across time and space. I know we have some of our other rabbinic colleagues, Rabbi Goldwasser. I think you are teaching about Brit Milah and welcoming rituals in a few weeks. And Rabbi Berman, who is with us, is going to be teaching about the act of Aliyah and of Torah reading. And so it's wonderful that we have them with us as well. And so we wish everybody a Shavua Tov. One last piece. If my count is right, today is the 10th day of the Omer, which is 3 days at no, is it the 11th?
Yeah. That way you can see better. The x-ray, just before making sure it's healthy.
Rabbi Goldwasser, what day of the Omer is it? Is it the 10th or 11th?
Today's the 11th day of the Omer.
Today is the 11th day. Yeah, it's what happens when you pick up children at college. You lose track of time. It's the 11th day, which is 1 week and 4 days in the Omer, as we are going from Egypt towards Mount Sinai, and we're glad that you're able to join us on this journey. Thank you, Rabbi Goldwasser. And thank you to Rabbi Jackson. Thank you to everybody. We will stay on for a few more minutes, but we are wrapping it up.